This is Keys to the Shop, episode 377, Coffee, Mindfulness, and the Art of Observation with Rob Sykes. Well, hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Keys to the Shop, where we give you insights, inspiration, and the tools you need to grow as a coffee service professional. My name is Chris DeFirio, and I'm your host for the show. Always happy to have you along for these episodes. And, if you want to stay updated with new episodes as they come out, and you want to help the show out too, you just need to hit subscribe wherever you're listening to this show. That really helps, get the show up there in the rankings. And also you get to be updated whenever new podcasts like the one today drops. And that's great because we put out a lot of content every month, really valuable content that you're not going to want to miss. So go ahead and hit subscribe. All it takes is a click of a button and you can share Keys to the Shop with the people who follow you on Instagram or LinkedIn, or just people in your life that you think can really benefit from the content of Keys to the Shop. Thank you so much for doing that. Now, on top of doing this podcast, Keys to the Shop also offers consulting and coaching. Keys to the Shop Consulting is all about helping you manage the day-to-day operations of your cafe, your people, and to give you clarity, perspective, and the tools to succeed in running a great coffee shop. If you want to take your quality, your operations, and your culture to the next level, let's have a conversation and see how Keys to the Shop Consulting can help you. To set up a free discovery call with me, all you need to do is email chris@keystotheshop.com. You can also reach out by sending me a direct message on Instagram. The handle there is @KeysToTheShop. Both of those work. I'd love to hear how I might be able to help you through Keys to the Shop Consulting. Again, reach out, chris@KeysToTheShop.com. Now, today's episode is brought to you by the Ground Control Cyclops Brewer from Voga Coffee. If you think you know how good drip coffee can taste from a batch brewer and you haven't had coffee from the Ground Control yet, you are going to be in for a surprise because it opens up an entirely new level of flavor possibilities through its SCA award-winning technology. The Ground Control Cyclops Brewer gives you control over an incredible range of flavors that you can extract with precision and predictability with ease. It's easy to train your staff on, and it's beautiful to look at. But on top of that, it not only brews batch coffee, but it also can make tea, batched iced lattes, batch cold brew. So you increase your profitability, your workflow, and your quality all in one machine. So I'd encourage you to go to groundcontrol.coffee to learn more about this incredible piece of equipment. If you're looking to level up and discover new levels of appreciation of coffee in your shop, then you for sure need to look at getting a Ground Control Cyclops brewer in your shop. Again, check them out over at groundcontrol.coffee. Today's episode of Keys to the Shop is also brought to you by the PICC Barista Series. Now, this is a line of plant-based performance beverages that is the standard setter for plant-based beverages worldwide. It is created for baristas, it is tested by baristas, and every time you use it on bar, it performs the way it should because of that R&D that's gone into every product. So it stands up to the heat from steaming, produces amazing silky texture, and also creates balance in the cup. That means there's no overwhelming flavors of the product itself. It's just harmony and balance and coffee-focused goodness. So this is all on purpose because they value your customer's experience. And so go visit them over at pacificfoodservice.com and get samples in your store to try for yourself. I definitely think you're going to be impressed. If you're looking to serve the best plant-based beverages possible, then I think you should be using the Barista Series from PICC. Okay, everyone. Well, I'm excited today because I get to interview somebody who I get to interact with on a pretty regular basis through the show Coffee Fest, the trade show, where I'm a head judge at the Coffee Fest World Latte Art Championship Open. We are talking today with Rob Sykes. Now, Rob is somebody who is kind of a fixture in the coffee community, especially around Houston, Texas, where he lives with his wife and daughter. He is a practicer of Zen meditation. He writes haikus, and he is a full-time RN at North Cypress Medical Center and a part-time photographer and content creator. But I know him mostly as a content creator or photographer because he's always taking wonderful snapshots of not only the coffee community in Houston, but also during the latte art competitions at Coffee Fest. And his history professionally also comes from personal firsthand experience of barista work and coffee shop work, mixed with this really artistic and mindful way of looking at the world. And what you get with all of that is Rob Sykes. And I appreciate his perspectives on culture, his ability to capture moments. And today we're going to dive into his world and talk about his evolution as a professional and how he has curated his own eye for culture and what to take photographs of, how he has observed the coffee shop community growing both in coffee shops themselves and on the latte art scene, and just really, get behind the lens, as it were, of somebody whose view of the industry is born from a desire to help people focus in on those moments that otherwise we might have missed, but we were participating in. And there's so much good that comes from the work of artists in the industry, like our friend Rob Sykes. And so I hope that you get a lot from this conversation as we dive into these topics, and it helps you appreciate where you are and the little things that you're interacting with daily. And it brings a whole new sense of appreciation for where you are in the coffee culture in general. So without anything else from me, let's get right to my interview with Rob Sykes. Rob Sykes, welcome to Keys to the Shop. How are you?
I'm doing great. Weather is beautiful here in Houston right now. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to sit down and talk with you. I see you all the time at Coffee Fest doing photography for slow pour during latte art, and you're one of those people that I think has a depth to you that informs the way you approach your photography and life itself. And I think that we're in for a great conversation. So I'm happy to talk with you today. So I guess maybe the first thing to talk about is what is it that you, before kind of discovering coffee, as it were, what is it that you were doing professionally, and what were you doing with photography at the time before coffee was a part of your life?
One thing to know is I actually work full-time as a nurse. So at the time that I was getting interested in coffee and photography, I was working as an ICU nurse, 3 12-hour shifts a week. So I had 4 days out the week to kind of dabble into creative things. So around 2016, I decided to start visiting coffee shops just to plug into the world more, feel like I was interacting with the world more as opposed to just going to work, coming home, playing video games, meditating, drinking tea on the patio. I just was looking for a way to feel like I was more engaged with the world. So I started going to coffee shops, and that's when photography started to become of a thing. It was starting to percolate a little bit, you could say. I was noticing the baristas behind the bar, the craft that was going into coffee. I was noticing the latte art. I was noticing the cafe spaces. I started photographing them with my phone, and over time, I started to meet photographers, like actual professional photographers. One in particular, Stephen Hebert, aka Photoman Steve on his IG. Met him at Blacksmith Coffee here in Houston. He introduced me to Fujifilm cameras, which was a professional camera. After he introduced me to that camera, I really started to go more down the rabbit hole and learn more about photography, about editing, about composition, and was noticing, the photos on Instagram that people were taking at coffee shops, and I just wanted to get better. Coffee introduced me to photography. Without coffee, I would maybe never have gotten into photography.
So you were introduced to photography through coffee, through your desire to be a part of the world around you. You're already part of it, but the point is that you wanted to interact more, and you had a routine that you were following. What is it about coffee shops that that attracted you to them? Like why start taking why start taking pictures of coffee shops versus landscapes or other areas, maybe other places where people gather. What was it about that scene that attracted you in the first place?
I've thought about that quite a bit, and I honestly think it ties into the Zen meditation practice I do. So the one part of the one reason I was going to coffee shops also early on was they were a place to kind of chill out before I would go to this Zen temple in town to meditate. And I would honestly just seek out coffee shops that had nice patios. I wasn't even interested in the coffee necessarily at the beginning. I was just looking for somewhere that I could sit outside, just kind of observe life and be there for a little bit before going to the Zen temple. But what was happening is I was noticing the methodical nature that went into making the coffee, and it seemed like an opportunity to kind of practice mindfulness, the process of tamping the coffee, locking in the porterfilter, steaming the milk, pouring the latte art. Something about that had this like almost, I guess you could say, almost a Zen like quality to it, where it seemed like an opportunity to practice mindfulness in action. And there was that part of it, the barista side of it, and then photographing the cafe space with the people involved in it. uh there was something attractive to me about the everyday ordinary life aspect to it. This kind of, you might say, mundane activities just seemed so special to me. They weren't just ordinary moments. They were, you know, people were going to coffee shops to intentionally do things, whether it be there and just drank the coffee by themselves and spend some time with themselves, or to read a book, or maybe they were meeting a friend or friends. So there was a lot of intentionality I noticed going on in the making of the coffee and in the people going to the coffee shops. And I felt this urge to photograph it.
Oh, yeah. It's interesting that you're talking about mindfulness and the development of muscle memory, the way baristas, work, and anybody who works develops a certain muscle memory about what they do as a way to sort of ground themselves in a sense of safety in those movements, that they can guarantee a positive outcome. And customers do that also, where they have a routine to go to a place. It may be a coffee shop, it might be a Zen temple, but the idea is if I do this routine, at the end of it, I will get something good. Whether I'm consuming it or I'm preparing it, it feels like both groups of people are kind of engaged in the same thing from different perspectives.
You said it. People are getting the same thing, but doing it in a different way. I never really thought of it in those words, but I feel like you hit the nail on the head right there.
Coming at this from the perspective of somebody who spends a lot of hours, those 3 12-hour shifts in the ICU as a nurse. And I know a little bit about this, not that I'm a nurse, but my mother was a night nurse in the ICU for 40 years. I don't know if you knew
I
that,
don't think so.
but yeah, yeah. And so I know full well, at least, tacitly, what kind of things you see in that environment. And it feels like, for you, I'll ask you this because I don't want to assume, but there's a sense of grounding that happens when you're in a cafe, where people are, yeah, they're at different stages of their life, but it's a remarkably different. It's a remarkably different environment than a ICU floor in a hospital. Everyone's ambulatory in a coffee shop, for more or less, and in ICU, it feels like you're stuck in this environment where there's a lot of urgency and gravity. So I wonder if there's sort of this balance that happens with seeking out coffee shops and capturing that, while you're simultaneously, like your eyes are capturing what's happening in your regular work, day in and day out.
For me, I think coffee shops were a place early on, at least, because I don't work in the ICU anymore. The first, let's say, about 6 years as a nurse, I worked in the ICU. And I'm thinking back, when I would get off work sometimes, I would go to this local coffee shop. For me, it was because of how hectic the ICU can feel and how many things are happening, it can feel like at once. Coffee shops were a place for me to, or at least this coffee shop, close to my house, was a place that I could intentionally slow down and ground myself before going home. Because when your mind's things are happening, it feels like at 100 miles an hour sometimes in the ICU. When you go home, if you go straight home from that, your mentality can come home with you. And I would notice that in my interactions with my wife, that I hadn't fully turned that switch off sometimes, and being able to go to a coffee shop and just sit there for maybe even just 10 or 15 minutes became a place to ground myself before continuing the evening.
So the people that you're photographing are having their own moment like that. They often will go to a coffee shop for that reason, to kind of pause between different activities where they need to regain a sense of self. And you mentioned mindfulness, like remind themselves that they're, maybe not just a passenger on this trip toward, called life. Maybe the caffeine in a chair reminds them that, oh, this is who I am. Now I can go home, or I can go to work.
That's a really great way of putting it. This I'm enjoying hearing your perspective on this. When you said caffeine in a chair uh, is an opportunity to remind oneself of who they are. Man, I'm gonna have to steal that. uh,
Yeah, well, you have this interesting thing going on your Instagram, I think, with you capture people's images, and or the image that you see, you actually have been writing haikus, that in little phrases that will capture a moment that you see. And I appreciate that, because that for us as professionals, oftentimes what you provide in your photography, I think, and in these snapshots of moments that are texts that you post, is similar to what a coffee professional needs, that a customer does, going to a coffee shop, where we don't really get to see as much of the details, because we're kind of in the chaos of running a coffee bar. You provide that for somebody as a professional, but you don't necessarily get that from the coffee itself the way that the consumer does. So when you started to take photos of coffee shops, I know that it started to gain the attention of, I know one particular coffee shop that's part of your story, maybe for that reason, but tell me more about what happened, that your pursuit of mindfulness and grounding, and then just your interest in coffee, how that kind of flowered and then led to something actually professional.
Before I started photographing professionally, I was working as a barista part time and working like 1 or 2 days a week. Because again, at the time I was in the ICU working 3 12-hour shifts, so I had time to dive into this coffee world. And as I was doing that, I was taking pictures as a barista, and then as a customer, and eventually, when I got like a real camera, my first real camera was a Fujifilm camera. I was taking photos at different shops and tagging the companies, and eventually, this one particular company, Amaya Roasting, the owner Max Gonzalez took notice. He liked my photos and offered me the opportunity to provide photos for that company's Instagram, as well as content on a set frequency. This was a huge eye-opening moment for me photographically, because I was just doing it for fun, and I enjoyed taking photos of the baristas and everyday life in the cafes. But now I had this opportunity to do it for a business and kind of highlight how their coffee connects with the coffee world in my city. I felt very inspired by this because it was like, wow, I can do something I enjoy doing and tell the story of how this business is connected to the coffee community. So I started, taking photos for them for a bit, and it began to organically open up other opportunities, other coffee photography jobs, non-coffee photography jobs, and all from the perspective of this kind of everyday life approach, and capturing uh, the beauty of everyday life, whether it be the how I'm photographing the baristas or the guests in the cafe space.
So, your experience as a barista simultaneously to being a nurse must have informed a lot of what you chose to focus on when you started to do photography in a professional way. Because, if you're a customer that wants to work for a coffee shop, or somebody who opens a coffee shop has never worked in coffee, once you cross that threshold, you either remain enamored but in a different way, or you just get you just get kind of like disenfranchised, like, oh, this is, I didn't know it was like this. Um, so obviously you were the former example in because you're still obviously doing coffee, and not as a barista at this point, but you're still involved in the industry in a deep way. So tell me a little bit about how your experience as a barista shaped the way that you evolved, how you decided to feature life and
Yeah.
culture in coffee shops.
So yeah, I think I had a unique opportunity because I was simultaneously working as a barista while also taking photos and managing the social media for a couple different companies. So as we talked about earlier, I'm in coffee, but I'm also not in it. And I think that being able to be on both sides of the line, so to speak, gave me or allowed me to have a unique perspective and see things from multiple angles. And I think that was tremendously helpful, and has been and still is uh, helpful with how I approach photographing coffee shops and coffee related things.
This is kind of getting into the nitty gritty a little bit, but um, I had this vision in my head of Rob pre-barista days, kind of in a therapeutic sense, going to coffee shops and taking photos of the things that were very maybe personally meaningful to you, and then had some connection to you, and then as a professional, expanding that, like you said, you have these different perspectives that expanded your view. And when you take photographs at Coffee Fest, I know that lots of people have said this to you before, after, when you do some work for Slow Pour during these competitions, you capture these moments that I think requires a little bit of preemptive, spidey sense, if you will, like, as somebody who has some, you have connection to enough to know that something's going to happen. What kind of sense is that? As a photographer, I think there's a difference between somebody who's, the person taking the iPhone picture whose finger just can't bring itself to hit the button. Uh, like they just don't know, like, take the picture. Oh my gosh, you missed it. Oh no, but then you have these opportunities where it feels like you have this sixth sense about how to pick these moments. Where does that come from, and how have you cultivated that?
Interesting question. I like the term of spidey sense, because it's funny you point that out. Because honestly, as far I'll talk about it in two ways. As far as photographing things in the coffee world, and then how street photography, because I do a lot of street photography, how that connects both. Um, so as far as like coffee fests, for example, I being a barista, uh, I know the sequence of events. I know what's going to happen next, for the most part. And then also having photographed Coffee Fest multiple times, that helps at this point. But just in the beginning, at least, being a barista and knowing that sequence of events and knowing what moments are interesting, uh, as the barista, as a barista making the coffee, and then also from the audience's perspective, because I'm aware of I'm keeping awareness of multiple things when I'm photographing coffee fest, for example. I'm paying attention to the barista, but I'm also paying attention to the audience in the background. And there's kind of a juggling going on, because when I photograph something, or a moment, I'm looking for an opportunity to tell the most about the story at that particular moment. So when I compose a photograph, for example, it's not necessarily like, let's say the barista's pouring latte art. I'm not necessarily just focused on the barista. I'm also considering the audience members in the back, and if there's a way I can craft this scene within those four corners of the viewfinder to make it a photograph that kind of ties in everything. So I'm paying, hyper close attention to both of those things at the same time, and to kind of tie in street photography and how that relates. So when I'm walking around, let's say New York City, doing street photography, there's a lot happening. It's happening quickly, and I'm trying my best to be present and paying attention to what's happening. And maybe there's this interesting person coming by. I'm like, oh, that person looks cool. I wanna get a photograph of them. But then also simultaneously, maybe there's like a scene happening off to the side, like maybe a child's crying to their mom. So it's like, and in this moment, I have the opportunity to either just photograph this interesting person I saw, or frame the scene in such a way that I can add this context off to the side of this baby crying, for example, and really tell the story of that moment. So you talk about the spidey sense. It's really it's about, number one, paying attention, and then number two, uh, anticipating what you expect might happen next.
I imagine there's a set of, like you said, this person seems cool, and then there's something else that piques your interest over to the left or to the right, in the foreground, etc. Um, yeah, it seems like it's subconscious, more than cultivated in a purposeful way, or is it both? Is there like a hierarchy of value that you use to determine, this is what I like? For instance, like, what do you want people to get from your photography when you put it out there, or is it simply a personal practice that happens to intersect with what people resonate with?
I think what you just said right there probably hits the nail on the head. Number one, it's a personal practice. It's a creative way for me to interact with the world uh, as an artist. But I think it does resonate with people because it tells a story about people. It's humans being humans, whether it's in the coffee world or it's out on the street. It's people, living their life, and I think I think people realize how fascinating that is when you freeze it, in one 500th of a second, or 1/125th of a second. When you freeze those moments, I feel it seems to have a value to it that you maybe don't notice while it's happening.
Do you think that people who engage with your photos are able to maybe further appreciate going forward things like, for instance, competition? Let's say that I know for certain, as a former competitor, the without photographs, you could almost not convince me that I was there. You know, it's hard because I'm just in tunnel vision, shaky, and I'm just rolling through it, and then all of a sudden I'm at the bottom of the hill, bruised and battered. And so then I look at the photographs, I'm like, oh, that's right. Yeah, okay. And so then going into the next one, it feels like I would then at least maybe have more mindfulness myself, having interacted with those snapshots.
The way you're describing it almost reminds. So I grew up playing basketball, and I still watch NBA almost religiously. And the way you're describing it almost sounds like a player watching the game tape.
Mm.
And you talk about those snapshots and being more mindful going forward. It's kind of like when a basketball player watches the game tape after the game, and they take notes of things that they can improve on going into the next game. So yeah, as a barista, I never really thought of it like that, but I I've done that myself. Now that you mention it, I've looked at things and taken mental notes of like, okay, I can do this better on the, going forward. But also, like you said, it's a reminder that you were there, because sometimes in those moments it's intense, and you're shaking. You're trying your best to focus on pouring the latte art, but your emotions can be all over the place. So those photos are a reminder that you were there. And something I wanted to point out, I think it's kind of cool. So I post a lot of these photos from Coffee Fest, the latte art competition, on my Instagram, and there's a lot of people who follow me on Instagram who aren't a part of the coffee world, and they see these photos, and one of the comments I'll get is, it looks so intense, or they look so focused, or there's a lot of
Mm.
emotion in it. And I think that's really awesome to hear, because it's I feel like then I've done my job, to tell the story of those baristas and that event and in that space, and people get an appreciation for the craft that coffee is, and the camaraderie and the community that's there as well.
Yeah, that's a very meaningful part of it. And I think that's a through line for a lot of professionals that draws them into and keeps them in coffee is the community. What have you observed about the industry that you want to see more of? It could be in coffee, I guess, or it could just be in the world. Is that what you just described? Is that one of those things? And what else do you think, as a person who from behind the lens has kind of curated this culture to the world in many different formats, um, you have to have picked up some themes and some rhythms and some values that are just there. What do you want to be amplified more in the industry?
As you were asking it, what comes to my mind immediately is the the camaraderie that I see in particular at Coffee Fest for the latte art competition. You see these baristas from around the country, from around the world. Sometimes this is the only time they see each other the whole year. In some cases, they see each other all the time. But in any case, there seems to be this genuine joy and appreciation that the baristas have for each other's pursuit of this craft. And I feel like sometimes baristas get a bad rap, or the barista world. Uh, you hear the negative commentary on, all you see all the memes
Hmm.
about different types of baristas, being aloof or being obsessed with their latte art and not paying attention to the customer, things like that. But then, when I see these guys and gals at the competition, and how much joy there is and how they support each other and try to lift each other up, I feel like that is something that is really cool, and other people in the coffee world may not even be aware of, and that especially people outside the coffee industry, they have no idea that maybe the coffee shop they're going to, that there's that this is going on, behind the scenes, that there's a lot of passion and intentionality going on behind that counter, and you don't realize how much energy has gone into that cup of coffee that you're drinking. So I think it would be cool to highlight that aspect, not focus so much on those negative stereotypes you see.
I agree. That's always been one of the things I tell people in competition. You could either go one way or another. You can have a, you know, um, Cobra Kai mentality. It's all factions. It's all like, we're all kind of part of this kumite, and everyone's isolated and whatever. But it's not necessary. It's not, at least with Coffee Fest latte art competition. It's not like that, and I don't think for other competitions, by and large, it's like that. It has been in the past, but competitions are a very isolated thing. There's rules and regulations. There's time. There's constraints that are put around it, and within that construct, a pessimistic person, which I'm not going to say that I have not been in my life, continue to nurse some sense of that. Yeah, it's easy to be, full of community and connection when you're in a competition like that, in that limited format. However, I think, and you tell me, I think, have you noticed that the way that you both do street photography, which is completely without, it seems like without constraint. Nobody's in a competition to get a hot dog on the street in New York. Maybe they are, I don't know. But also, then there's people in this very constrained and formulaic kind of environment. Not that their connections are that way, but it seems like there's these two this juxtaposition between street photography and competition photography, because the environments they're so different, but it's validating both. It's like to me, when I see stuff that you put out there, there's beauty in the mundane, and then there's beauty in the cultivated, which Coffee Fest is definitely cultivated.
Yeah, that's an interesting way of looking at it. You know, honestly, I think my approach is probably my approach is pretty much the same, whether it's street photography or coffee fest or a coffee shop. I think the only real difference is that in a coffee shop or in coffee fest, the constraints actually help that spidey sense, so to speak, because I know there's limited options. There's less. It's not like on the street where anything can happen. It feels more like there's an unlimited possibilities in the coffee shop and in coffee fest. You kind of have a sense of what the potential next sequence of events are going to be. So, like at Coffee Fest. you're seeing on, let's say it's day 3, and you got the top 16 baristas, and it's a very intense day. So that when you the judges are looking at the coffee and getting ready to make your pick for who won that round, I know what the next sequence of events are gonna be. There's gonna be emotion, most likely from the barista that won or the barista that lost, and there's going to be a reaction from the crowd. So in those moments, I'm paying attention to both of those things and trying to capture the most emotion in a moment like that. And then in a coffee shop, if I see a guy come in with a newspaper, and I know, okay, this guy, he's going to find himself a quiet corner or go outside and open up that newspaper and drink his coffee. I'm anticipating, those sequence of events to capture this, in this case, a more mundane thing, but a beautiful moment for that person.
For that person, I feel like that's key. Playing devil's advocate here, I think. Isn't there a risk with photography curating life in such a way that creates a disappointment with the everyday?
Disappointment with the everyday. So from my perspective, and I think this is shaped tremendously by the Zen meditation practice that I do, that the more attention you pay moment to moment to the everyday things, the more interesting life actually becomes. So mundane things like reading a newspaper are not actually mundane at all. Those moments, if you break it down, as much as you can break something down, the act of unfolding the newspaper, flipping through the pages, the feeling of the paper in your hands, that newspaper feel, the smell of the newspaper, sitting in the chair, you have this image of a guy with his legs, crossed. This is not just a mundane moment. This is someone putting themselves 100% into what they're doing at that moment. And to me, when I see things like that, or when I'm that person myself, if I'm sitting outside reading a newspaper or a book, these moments feel so peaceful to me, and I think it's not disappointing at all. These little life moments are maybe the most important moments.
I like that. There's a wealth around us that we haven't tapped into, in the beauty and the mundanity of life, for sure. That with the way you put it, with looking closely at what's happening. And I told my son the other day, the other day was like 3 months ago, but it was still a day. So we're into like geodes and gemstones and crystal type stuff, like learning about the geological stuff. He's really fascinated with it. And, the message with geodes for me has always been there's something outside of this rock that belies what's on the inside. There's beauty on the inside that's formed under pressure underground for a long time. You crack it open, you see it. But a sidewalk is the same thing. And so if you looked really close at a sidewalk, you would notice that there's geometrical patterns and interconnected like rules of physics at work that in and of themselves together in mass create mundane sidewalks, but by themselves are like a miracle of engineering and physical space and stuff. So and you could just go nuts.
No, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the trick is how to enter into, like I can imagine everything that we're talking about now might seem like super esoteric to people, I think, in some way. Like, oh, well, that's nice, but I have bills and I got to go to work and all that stuff. But I feel like supplementally, this kind of thing that you do and the images that you share and the emotions that you capture, these are things that will, if you allow it to, reinforce the things that not that you need to be, start becoming like Rob, go out there and start photographing your life. And, like you can still fully participate in your life and still like zoom out at least, or zoom in as it were, to see the beauty in it, and then continue reading your newspaper, continue going to work, but let that perspective kind of aid you in mining its value, I suppose.
Yeah. That's been one of the cool things about photography, in particular from a street photography approach, is when you're paying attention, you notice things that most people don't notice. And a lot of these things that you notice that are interesting, it's like normally if you were just walking down the street without a camera, you wouldn't think twice about seeing like a 75-year-old lady, for example, walking down Fifth Avenue eating an ice cream. Like you would see that and not even process that moment probably. But when you have a camera uh, and you're looking for interesting everyday life things, that becomes so fascinating. Seeing this lady enjoying her ice cream walking down the street, or to use a coffee shop comparison, to see a mom with her daughter sitting on the coffee shop patio, and her daughter's eating a croissant while mom enjoys her morning cup of coffee. Like without a camera, everybody walks by this and doesn't really pay much attention. But with a camera, it's like now you have this opportunity to really savor this beautiful moment, and preserve it.
Yeah, it's a great point. You are calling attention to that thing, and it's easier to recognize it, I guess, later when it comes up. So maybe in the beginning it might have been hard for people to recognize the value of coffee community, for example. But now that, we have photos and videos, and we have this context where it's being reinforced by the just drawing attention to it, when I'm with people at a throwdown or a competition, or just even working the shift, it sort of deepens my perspective of their humanity in a way. So they're not just like this NPC in my life, right? They're somebody who, like the lady eating an ice cream cone. Like I wouldn't process that, but there are people next to her, and there are people related to her who probably don't even really pay much mind to her because they're busy in the fray, in the chaos. And it feels like what you do with your photos is allow people to say it's okay to slow down and sort of add value to the thing that you are participating in. And I'm really grateful for that gift that you give people with photos, and showing them something that they may or may not have recognized happened, and absolutely will color the way that they view the past and actually the future. So like photos on coffee farms, for example. I don't know if you've ever had the opportunity to do that, but the actual value stream of coffee is aided or kept in a status quo by the way it's depicted in media.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I haven't had the opportunity to go to a coffee farm yet, but you bring up a great example of without photos of that, I wouldn't fully have an appreciation of the hard work that men and women from across the world are putting in to bringing this coffee over here.
Well, we need to anyone listening that wants to hire Rob to go to a coffee farm. Get in the show notes and contact him. I want to kind of wrap up here talking about what inspires you, or maybe even who, because I know there's, photographers out there who you look up to. And so I want two things, I guess. One is, what in the coffee industry continues to inspire you, and outside of the coffee industry, who is like a role model for you, who's really inspiring you to keep doing what you're doing in street photography, and maybe also in the industry of coffee photography.
Well, as far as inspiring me in the coffee realm, uh, honestly, Coffee Fest is a big one. Um, I really look forward to photographing Coffee Fest. I like the whole barista thing and latte art. I still feel the same excitement for it that I felt from day one. Like it has never gotten boring to me. So that knowing that, okay, in a couple months, I'm gonna go to this city and I'm gonna get to photograph these guys, uh, you know, guys and girls pouring coffee, and then also I'm gonna get to visit different coffee shops in that city, and maybe get some like photographs while I'm in that space or outside that space. So those those trips inspire me a lot to keep doing this. It's just it's a lot of fun. I really enjoy. And then as far as like street photography goes, yeah, there's one guy. He's based in New York. He goes by Polly B on Instagram and YouTube. And as far as street photographers go, and in our modern era, he's probably going to go down as one of the best street photographers of our time. Not only for like the how he photographs and the quantity he does it at, but he's helped foster this community around street photography that I haven't seen anyone else doing with his YouTube channel. So he started out just doing POV videos of himself walking around New York doing street photography, which was a great learning tool for me to see, okay, what kind of help guide my spidey sense when I'm out on the street. Like, okay, what kind of things is he looking at and looking for, and how is he angling this and framing this? But then now he's got this thing where he has other either well-known street photographers or maybe less well-known on his channel, and they do these what he's called walkie-talkie sessions, where they walk around New York almost like a walking podcast, and they discuss photography. And meanwhile, that photographer, you may be seeing them take photos while they're out and about on the street, and I get a tremendous amount of inspiration from that guy's channel, and because of the amount of wisdom that gets shared on it, and then also from his photographs, seeing how he's seeing things. I take mental notes, and I try to incorporate those things into my not only my street photography practice, but when I'm in the cafe space or at Coffee Fest, those it a lot of that wisdom ties in to how I approach photography in the coffee world also.
Awesome. Polly B, right?
Yeah, Pauli and then B.
Nice.
Yeah, I forgot what his last name is, but yeah, it's just a B.
There's truth to the idea that a lot of creative people are attracted to coffee. And I'm extremely happy that coffee attracted you and your work. I'm happy about this conversation. This is something that I think really is going to help a lot of people in their perspective of their work, and hopefully they're able to capture moments more so going forward, just being inspired by your story. And so thank you, Rob. I appreciate you joining me on the show. Where can people learn more about what you do and view your photos and all of that?
Yeah, well, number one, I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you. I actually, the way your perspective on things was very helpful for me too. The way you see things was very interesting. So I learned some things about myself talking with you. But as far as where you can see my photos and work, I'm on Instagram at Layman Rob. That's Layman_Rob. And then I'm on Twitter as well, but it's the same stuff as the Instagram. And then my website is laymanrob.com, which currently has just black and white street photography from New York, because I've got 2 galleries going here in Houston. So if you're in the Houston area, I've got a gallery up at Catalina Coffee and Luce Coffee, both featuring about 10 to 12 black and white street photographs from New York over the past year or so.
Beautiful. Yeah, everyone check that out for sure. And again, Rob, appreciate you. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. It was enlightening for me.
Okay, everyone. Well, I hope that you really got a lot from that. And one of the things I walk away from this conversation with is the idea that if we slow ourselves down enough during the day to really kind of be still and observe what's happening around us, we can pull beauty from the minutia, from the seemingly mundane. And that is an enriching experience. It's something that helps us ground ourselves, and in the chaos of working in a coffee shop especially, it's necessary to create a habit of these little mini meditations, if you will, in observing and trying to mine your surroundings for their beauty. And I think Rob has done such a great job of doing that for the industry through his photography. And I'm grateful that we got an opportunity to talk with him today. So a big thank you to Rob Sykes for joining me on the show. Really a pleasure. If you want to follow Rob on Instagram, his handle there is Layman_Rob, LAYMAN_Rob. And you'll see what he's up to. You'll see his photography, and you kind of dive into the content from there. So thanks again, Rob. And if you have any questions, comments, or feedback for me about today's episode or any other episode of the show, you can go ahead and email chris@keystotheshop.com. And if you're interested in working with Keys to the Shop Consulting to help you assess your cafe, help you start a cafe off on the right foot, or you just want some coaching and guidance and clarity for a project that you're taking on or a challenge that you need to work through in your cafe, let's talk, let's set up a call, and I'd be happy to talk with you, and really it would be an honor to help. Go ahead and email chris@keystotheshop.com. And I want to let you know, of course, I told you Rob is always at these Coffee Fest trade shows, and he's working with Slow Pour, makers of some of the best and most innovative latte art pictures out there. And those shows, like you've heard, are a real concentrated dose of culture. And not only that, but Coffee Fest trade shows for the last 30 years has been doing these trade shows where they also offer free and accessibly priced lectures, trainings, workshops, panel discussions. So it equips you to be a great coffee shop operator and professional, all while offering this concentration of culture through competitions and the trade show floor. Really is something you should check out if you are a coffee retailer of any stripe. Go to coffeefest.com and check out the upcoming shows for 2023. Use the code KEYS, KEYS, to get 50% off your registration when you sign your team and yourself up for these upcoming shows. And if you see me, I really hope that you say hello. I'd love to meet you. Again, register yourself and your team up today over at coffeefest.com. And with that, that is the end of the show, everybody. Don't forget to subscribe to Keys to the Shop. Don't forget to share these episodes on your platforms, whether it's just an episode or just recommending Keys to the Shop to a group of people or your followers. All of it really helps. And if you love this show, please leave us a 5-star review on iTunes, on Apple Podcasts, as it were. That really helps the show as well. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. And as always, I hope that this episode has truly given you keys to the shop.